when it comes to anthropology, could you define what anthropology is and isn't, and how it applies or how it can apply to everyday life for people who don't study it directly?
Well, so anthropology is quite simply the study of humans. You know, it can mean different things. So, for example, it can be the study of the evolution of humans on a biological level. I do a bit of that too, right? How this animal evolved over time. And I love to leverage that knowledge and that science to help people understand how the things that they do in the present are actually connected to an ancient story of human physiological, biological evolution. And it's great because when you get into the science, it helps us to break through some of the myths of evolution and the myths of the inevitability of what it means to be human. So a lot of people are like, well, humans do this or humans do that, or men are naturally designed to do this, or or women are naturally designed to do that, and when we get into the science, it really helps to break a lot of those myths. A lot of those myths are created by cultures and communities and people within a community who actually benefit from allowing that myth to keep going. So, the myth of men are like this and women are like that are often propagated to serve men if they're in a higher position within a social hierarchy. So we get to break those myths by looking at the science, by looking at the history in our bones and in the archaeology and in our bodies over time. You could also look at anthropology from a cultural perspective. So, the evolution of human physical the evolution of the human physical species is one thing. The other thing is the evolution of human cultures, the ways in which we have, processed all the experiences that we have in the world, the way that we've been able to make sense of the world that we live in, the way that we've been able to, store all that information, not just in our bodies, but in our cultures, in our relationships, in our books, in our rituals, in our artifacts of material culture, in our symbols, in our stories, in our songs. We can use that culture to recall that information, that vast amount of information that's stored in our cultures, our bodies, our landscapes, etc., to kind of think about how we can live in this world. But also how we have got these cultural worldviews that enable us to deal with change when it occurs, that enable us to deal with crisis. And this is the kind of the paradox of worldviews, is that our cultural worldviews create they call them, like mental heuristics or mental shortcuts that make it easier to process vast amounts of information in a short period of time. And that enables us to have a level of efficiency, right? To process the world really quickly through symbolic thought and that sort of stuff. But they can also be dangerous because they can create lazy thinking and stereotypes and biases and prejudices and conspiracy thinking. So being aware of that as an anthropologist helps us to kind of be mindful of the traps and the pitfalls of something that we do, as humans. But as soon as we assume that the way that our culture lives in the world, or as soon as we assume that our way of being in the world is the only way of doing it, we actually create blind spots that can leave us at risk of not being able to handle the inevitable changes of a dynamic and complex world that we live in. So, we can look at physical, biological, human evolution, the evolution of human culture, the evolution of human diversity, both biologically and culturally. We can look at it, use anthropology to understand language and symbolism and rituals and habits, like the way that we live in the world, but also what are the underlying kind of structures of meaning that hold all of that stuff together. Because in understanding those things, and bringing our awareness to those things and acknowledging that those things are not inevitable or true for everybody, then we have a choice. Just because we've been doing it this way for so long doesn't mean we have to keep doing it this way for so long. Means that we can choose to do things differently. And our ability to choose to do things differently is kind of the source of our adaptive capability. We are able to adapt because we don't have to do things the same way all the time. And our ability to adapt is contingent on the fact that we are not perfectly adapted or evolved to be one kind of animal in one kind of environment. Our ability to adapt is contingent on being able to kind of question the status quo and the norms, our ability to see things differently, to acknowledge that there is a different way of doing things, a different way of being in the world. And so this is where that kind of that loop of anthropology, which is, I always felt different. I always felt challenged by the status quo, and it sort of lent itself to being an anthropologist because I could see things differently. I was always questioning, who does it serve? Who does it leave out? Who created this norm? How can we actually have different ways of seeing this or different ways of doing this thing to give us more options?